Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and our first look at the power rankings for Season 4. It's quite literally the first few days of level 100 though, which was kind of day 1 as well. The leveling was so fast this time, we can't really base our first look on that topic alone. Normally there's real competition there, and a clear showing of what class speeds through the levels compared to the others, but this time it was a lot more varied and short. But hey, we do have interesting things to look at, like the early Gauntlet leaderboards and the pit, actual endgame systems, reasonable ways to judge the state of things. Amazing. For our first early look though, since everything is still very up in the air and the numbers are going to wildly change day to day, we're going to take this with a grain of salt and look at different topics and come to a conclusion. So to begin with, that very fast leveling. Who hit level 100 first and as what? We expected Necromancers to win again. They've won the race to level 100 multiple seasons in a row. Previously it was because Blood Surge requires next to nothing to smash quickly, no aspects or stat minimum requirements, and then you had Bone Spear to transition into, which is very good once you had those things ready. Instead of Necromancer, Bone Spear, and Blood Surge, it was in fact Blood Surge, Necromancer, and Minion. Very expected. Vega once again took the first place spot, reaching level 100 as a Necromancer again in just 7 hours and 22 minutes. And this is compared to Rob reaching level 100 back in pre-season. That took him a hilarious 54 hours back then. So it's not a massive shock, but it is interesting. Necromancer wasn't standout compared to normal. Normally it'd be a pile of Necromancers at the top of the list, a pile of Sorcerers near that, and then a mix of Barb and Rogue, and Druid usually last. This time, 4 of the 5 were right at the top. Vega was in a 4-man group again, usually is, but compared to last season's where it was a group of Necromancers or even a duo, this time he was in a group with other big streamers. Rob, Luciano, Rengar, who each played a different class. Just Druid was missing from the group. So Vega may have won, but Rob was closely behind on his Barb, just 2 levels. So it's hard to say which class was a standout compared to the others. It is really close, but I still think it's fair to say Necromancer and even Sorcerer remain at the top for their effectiveness from start to finish and the pace that they can achieve it in. Next though, let's jump in game and talk about a less serious category for endgame, which is the Gauntlet. This is a bit less serious because people don't seem to value this all that much. It released to a flat response last season despite some cool ideas, and I guess nothing in there is really a big challenge. It's more about crushing the route presented in the most effective way possible. But obviously your output isn't going to matter that much if you're too slow to get to the places in time. So let's look at the scores live. Starting at the bottom, to my surprise, it's Rogue, who is noticeably behind all the other classes. Melamun here is currently at the top with just under 400,000 points. When I consider Mippy, who's actually number 10 right now, one of the world's best rogues in general, and his feedback for Rogue based on the PTR is that Rogue is having to fight very hard without the same output, without the same survivability, and so it really looked like Rogue would probably be at the bottom of the board for the classes overall. This is a pretty relevant example because Rogue is not struggling for mobility. They can get to the places fast, but it seems the output they have when they get there isn't comparable to the other classes. Now above that is Druid. Druid doesn't have nearly as much build power diversity as the other top contenders, but it does have Tornado Druid, and clearly that's doing something. Most of these are about 400,000, so just above Rogue, except for this random one from Jeweler here. So Druid definitely has some power as, the sprinting as the werewolf form works, and their output is very respectable. This is relatively comparable, at least that top run, to Barbarian, which is number 3 at 550,000 roughly. But yeah, most of these scores are quite close, a clear showing that it's not an outlier. Barbarian can sprint around and roar and smash pretty much anything it does reach, so this makes sense to me. This brings it between Necromancer and Sorcerer, and in the first few days it was actually Sorcerer at the top. Now though, at this exact moment, their top 2 are in 750-ish thousand points, with Necromancer being above that with 3 people, one being at nearly 800,000. Right now it's about a 40,000 difference, so it's very close, but this surprises me because logically Sorcerers are able to blast around and deal the damage. Necromancers cannot really keep up with their pace. It would seem that their output makes up for things though, so it's interesting to see Necromancer and Sorcerer so close here in the Gauntlet, but Necromancer actually takes it. Okay, so last up, let's now consider the pit progress in these early days. You might find it interesting to hear that completing roughly level 100 is the standard right now. There are a few documented clears at around that level, but nothing's wildly ahead or maybe massively behind. It's pretty good. I expected Necromancer to do very well due to their output, but then they'll have to balance that in favor of survivability. Very quickly, the huge health pools and insane damage of the enemies will mean you need to become immortal to push higher, just like in Xur. How much can you sustain that immortality while pushing your DPS high? That was what it was all about. Tier 25 Abattoir is equal, allegedly to the devs anyway, to around level 150 pits. This time though, we don't have the busted DPS glyph of blood that would constantly push your damage ever forward, allowing you to keep pushing the tiers higher back in the abattoir. Without something like that, there should be a hard limit on what's possible for each class. So with a grain of salt in mind, here's what I was able to find for documented proof for each class. First up, we have Rob himself, who has achieved a tier 110 on Barbarian using a Bash Barb setup, which is proving to be the strongest option so far. It looks like the health on the mobs is certainly taking a lot more work, but this build was reaching that immortal status pretty well, taking ticks of damage here and there, but mostly just tanking it while fortified, maximizing DPS and ignoring the mobs. Barbarian was king of Abattoir because of this same concept, so it certainly looks likely again. It is expected though that bosses are going to be the main wall for players rather than, the mobs before. Rob reached the boss with 11 minutes left, but it took a good 6 minutes before the kill actually happened. He can clearly push things a bit further than 110, but the boss is going to be a real wall. Under that, the highest documented clear we found is by Scum, the top Necromancer player each season and was high in the Gauntlet boards in general Season 3. Now this may shock you, but he was playing Golem Minion Necromancer. Crazy. Scum does admit in his video though that he's leaning on the current bug or exploit with the new elixir Holy Bolts. For some reason, it's really good with companions, triggering off them and exploding in mass AoE and burst. So it is a bit hard to look at this fairly because that damage from the Bolt elixir is really impactful here, but I still think a Necromancer will be able to achieve around these levels anyway. So Scum was pushing a tier 106 in this footage and is using the standard setup, but leaning on Temerity for hide shielding, to keep himself alive, as well as dropping more DPS with something like Blight to run Blood Mist to avoid nasty damage when needed. As imagined then, Minion Necromancer that's sacrificing DPS for survivability is the way. Currently, even now, the survivability is not comparable to what Barb is doing and how it's face tanking. That could be a big limiter for Necromancer, but we will see as things progress. Next up, I was able to find an incredible tier 100 clear by a Sorcerer, who, we expected to struggle with their lower competitive DPS output. This appears to rely, however, on another cheese or exploit of some kind. Something strange with the shield is happening here, and I do expect Josh, our resident Sorcerer main, to cover this in a video soon. Basically, this player Roxy is able to use this immortal Firebolt build, requiring very specific gear for perfect tempers and even masterworks, becoming somewhat immortal, relying on Flame Shield to block all the damage. This means they can survive the fight long enough to, kill it eventually, but the clear is a much tighter timer compared to the others we've looked at, having just over 3 minutes left in this tier 100 clear. Equal to that right now though is Rogue. Despite the situation with the Gauntlet, the Rogue is competing with Sorcerer in the pits. Credit to Mippy for this one. He's using what he calls the Heartseeker Victimize build, and what's incredible about this clear is just how fast he's doing it. Hard stunning and dazing the enemies. They can't kill him because they can't even attack. He's free to absolutely smash them while they're frozen or dazed or stunned or otherwise. So much like Barb, his health isn't moving all that much. Pretty incredible as a way to overcome the danger, just CC it. He reaches the boss with 11 minutes to spare though. Really fast clear, spending only 2 minutes to kill the boss. So seriously impressive, and I recommend you check out the video and build on Mippy's channel. Lastly, and very shortly, I am sad to say I can't find a good source for Druid footage right now. The only real footage I've seen are around tier 60s, like this footage by Goblin Inc., which seems very reliable as Tornado Werewolf. I do believe Druid should be able to push higher than this. It's just one of the lesser, least popular classes right now, so maybe that's why there's not a lot of documentation or footage around this, but it doesn't mean it's weak. In the coming days and weeks, the pit rankings are going to change a lot, and hopefully we'll get more proof for all of the classes as we go. Ultimately though, if your class can clear tier 61 plus pits, you can pretty much get everything you're going to need from them. And at this point, clearly, all of the classes can, even in these early days. So I'd say that's pretty good balance for the pit as a form of endgame. Now it's a question of who can push beyond that and see how far everyone can go. But there you have it. That's my overview of the current class power and how things are going right now. I still think Necromancer's looking to be the king of damage. It was pretty tight in terms of leveling ability, but again, I think Necromancer was the reliable winner. Gauntlet's a lot more interesting. It's very close between Necromancer and Sorcerer, just because the Gauntlet's less so about output. And then you've got the pits, which are looking pretty well balanced for their important reward tiers 60 plus. And it does look like everyone should be able to reach around a tier 100, but beyond that, it's going to come down to their ability to be immortal, and then how much DPS are they sacrificing to achieve that. I hope this video was useful or interesting, but for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.